Okay, so good afternoon. So I've got around about 40 minutes to spend talking to you about cloud security. What I'm going to focus on is really, I guess, to kick off with, just kind of taking a step back and sort of thinking, well, you've heard a lot about cloud today, and hopefully this won't be repeating too much of what you've heard, but I suppose trying to put some context around the security side of things is really what I want to do to kick off with. So kind of before cloud, well, what sort of things did we do before cloud? Well, first and foremost, we went out there and probably bought an awful lot of equipment. You know, we had to first of all decide what we wanted to buy, first and foremost. And certainly in a security context, in some of the things I'll be talking about, there was always the question of, well, how do I scale it? What kind of user count do I have? And all these kind of challenges to try and originally just engineer. The second thing you've then got to consider is really the idea of course, installing it, maintaining it, skills. And then finally, what a lot of people ended up with was a situation where you've potentially got overcapacity. And of course, this is one of the most fundamental things behind cloud, was that, you know, delivering that elasticity to the sort of compute environment and to the services environment that customers really demand. And the same is true in security. You know, the security services really, when we talk about security, we pick up on a few different threads, and one of them is about delivering security from the cloud. And there are some services that I'll talk about that are very well placed to deliver their capability from the cloud, because you can leverage the sort of universal knowledge, if you like, of the cloud to be able to deliver a greater level of capability. Now, the other side of it, if you like, before cloud was complexity. You know, what I'll be talking about later is a lot around web content security and things like this, and it's the complexity of being able to build and maintain those services, which a lot of customers ran into as well. And not to mention cost. You know, some of this comes from overcapacity, over engineering, but a lot of it just comes from having to build out capability that you know, it's just expensive, you know, to customize and deliver. And of course, at the end of the day, these things don't always deliver what your users necessarily demand. And of course, security, I'll let this one build out. Security has always been a consideration, whether that's security from a governance perspective, and you know, I can talk at length about that sort of things, or whether that's security from the point of view of, well, now I've got this stuff in the cloud, how do I actually go ahead and protect it? And I'm sure you know, some of the presenters throughout the day have talked about some of those points to a certain extent. What I'll be talking more about is more about the services side of things, as I said. So I'll sort of define what I mean by cloud security. And I think really it broadly breaks down into three different areas. Firstly, and probably the major focus of this presentation, is cloud security services. So this is taking traditional security services that you would deliver on premises and putting them in the cloud. Why would you do that? Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's really trying to define just a broad set of capabilities that are easily, you know, transplantable into the cloud environment away from your own in-house developed environment. And then we've got secure cloud access. So I'll talk later about some of our own experiences within Cisco, but actually accessing cloud services introduces some additional interesting security paradigms that are also important to be able to consider. And then finally, I'll talk about securing the cloud infrastructure. Not a major focus of this presentation. Happy to take questions offline. Or after the session, but really, you know, securing the cloud infrastructure, are there new things we need to do, are there new considerations, are there new threat profiles? Some of the biggest challenges that I think we face are probably more in the governance and risk management space than they are in the technology. That's a personal view, and I think they're echoed generally within the industry. So we'll start off with kind of cloud services. So first and foremost, what we're trying to deliver with cloud services is really sort of three core things. First of all, we want to try and make sure the cloud service is able to deliver a kind of location agnosticity, if that's a word. If not, I've just invented it. What I mean by this is being able to deliver consistent user experience. One of the challenges I see in a lot of my public sector customers is the fact that there is a great deal of more enhanced mobility and workforce mobility going on within that sector at the moment. And if you work in the public sector, you'll know there are massive drivers to probably expand that rather than contract it. And so what you need to ensure from a security perspective is to ensure that irrespective of where those employees are, you want to make sure that their policy is enforced uniformly. You know, you don't want users to have a mobile device to be able to take it home and then experience a very different experience than if they were in the office or if they were in another branch location. So it's really about trying to deliver that location agnostic policy. Secondly, it's got to be seamless. You've got to be able to deliver a uniform policy, as I've already mentioned, but it's also got to be transparent to the user. You'll know if you've worked in IT for a while that the user experience is absolutely paramount in any kind of security solution. If you put barriers in the way, most people will try and figure out a way around them, yeah? That's typical of most security solutions. It has to be seamless, it has to be transparent. And then finally, it's got to be unified. So from an administration perspective, the most important thing is to be able to deliver that unified view. So you can tell, almost cradle to grave, what's happened on a particular user session, who's accessed what, where, when, and how. So if there is an outbreak, or there is an infection, or there's a data loss, then you've got that visibility there to be able to track that across from the start point to the end point. And we should be able to deliver this, and the way that Cisco have focused on it is being able to deliver this kind of irrespective of where you are, whether you deliver that in the cloud, and I'll be talking obviously about that side of things, or actually whether you want to talk about delivering on-premise. And actually, we can deliver a hybrid solution because there are some benefits of being able to deliver certain on-premise capability, and there are some benefits of being able to deliver cloud security solutions as well. So I'll talk about both of those areas. So email security. As many of you know, we acquired a company called Ironport 5 years or so ago. So Ironport were, and still are to a certain extent, I suppose, the leader in email security. Really leveraged by a huge global database called Senderbase. And what Senderbase was really a cloud intelligence service that Ironport had built up prior to the acquisition, and we continue to build on, that allowed us to leverage a global level of intelligence around making decisions about spam, about malware, and so on and so forth, to really improve that efficacy rate of detection, but also to try and remove actual threats coming into the organization. And today, this service can also be consumed from the cloud. You look at delivering email security services on-premise, there's a cost and complexity to do that. Some customers have the skills in-house to be able to deliver that, of course. But actually, if it's not core business, you can take that service very easily into the cloud. And of course, public sector has leveraged some of that in the UK through services delivered through GSI and so on. But I think that kind of consumption model is going to continue as we move into some of the new areas. The public sector network, you may be aware of the PSN. It's a program I'm involved in pretty heavily, is very centered around services and service-led procurement. So, being able to take these kind of very easily consumed services and put them in the cloud is really the direction that we're going to go in. So the email software as a service is there today, it's deliverable. It could also be delivered as a hybrid capability. And what I mean by hybrid is where some of the intelligence lives within the cloud. So we take advantage of things like inbound spam filtering in the cloud. We take advantage of things like inbound malware filtering in the cloud. But actually, when you start to think of email security, you might also want to consider things like data loss prevention. You might also want to consider things like email encryption. Now, to an extent, there's kind of little point in putting those things in the cloud simply because if they leave your premises unencrypted, isn't that defeating the object, yeah? So what we can do is deliver a hybrid solution where some of that intelligence remains on-premise, email encryption, data loss prevention type technologies, and then that dovetails seamlessly into the cloud solution in order to deliver the inbound protection. So what you get is kind of best of both worlds with regards to email security offerings. On the web security side, again, this was really trying to deliver increased value through it kind of, I suppose, leveraging cloud intelligence, I suppose, is what it ultimately boils down to. It wasn't that long ago when web security was really all about a black and white list that was sat on the edge of your network that you had to maintain somehow, or you had a heartbeat from any number of different players in the marketplace who would deliver you updated URL lists on a pretty regular basis to know where things were going to and from and what you wanted to block. Now, again, more recently, that sort of approach begins to break down because you end up with domains that are registered within a matter of minutes or hours and then drop down again that are hosting malware. You end up with very legitimate websites hosting malware. And actually, a lot of malware is delivered over legitimate websites because we know that consumers are going to go to them. So being able to take a huge amount of intelligence and put that in the cloud is really where the ScanSafe web security capability was born out from. So being able to deliver a centrally managed, centrally hosted, something that's not on your premises, all you need to do is get your web traffic to it, being able to deliver that intelligence in a cloud service so that you can take advantage of what cloud delivers, which is infinite or unlimited amounts of compute and resources to be able to scan that traffic, but also to get greater levels of visibility because, of course, we're not just looking at traffic from your organization, we're actually looking at traffic from many hundreds of thousands of organizations. So, of course, what we get from that is a greater level of visibility and a greater level of accuracy over the kinds of things that are both good and bad. And of course, then what we can also do is spin that around and deliver a great deal of intelligence as well. So we can deliver, again, that cradle-to-grave reporting so that you can see exactly what kind of usage the web is getting, what kind of malware is being hit, what kind of categories are being attempted to look at, and so on and so forth. And so the kind of challenge that, in particular, the web side of things is really there to try and deliver against is really one that I see in a lot of my customers. I spent a number of years working in the healthcare sector. More latterly, I spend a lot of time across all public sector organizations. And of course, whilst you don't necessarily have the global reach like that, you've certainly got a lot of organizations that are highly distributed. And that distribution is going to increase, certainly as you look at the mobile space. You know, of course, there is mass consolidation and reduction in the number of premises that are actually within the public sector, but there's certainly going to be an increased usage of mobile devices, mobile and remote working. So being able to try and address that complexity that comes from, well, I've got 50 different locations, I need to apply some level of consistent policy across all of those locations for my web traffic, but what I don't want to do is hairpin that in and out of a central point and then squirt it out, because if my network links fail, then I'm going to lose my traffic. I've now got to chew up loads of bandwidth on my private WAN, and that's going to be unnecessarily chewed up because all my web traffic is now going to filter out of a central location. So there's a bunch of challenges that sort of come up from that highly distributed environment that really the ScanSafe web security solution was designed to try and address, because of course what you instantly get is the ability to be able to take traffic directly from a single location and send it straight into the cloud, as long as that location obviously has internet access directly of some way, shape or form. And so what you end up is a much more simple environment. You end up with a much easier deployment because as far as you're concerned, you have another 50 users at a site. You don't have to think about rescaling or rejigging the hardware that's actually potentially located on that site. You just go and buy another 50 licenses from the service, and away you go. It's really that simple. So you can flex it up and down based upon your own users' requirements. And of course, again, you still maintain that level of visibility and reporting that comes with that type of service. Now, the cloud in of itself is not isolated. You know, it's not something that kind of sits and exists in isolation. We've got to be able to kind of tie that in with the rest of the network infrastructure in order to get the visibility that we need. And so we've got really two areas that I'll focus on. One of them is called Unified Network Insertion, Unified Mobility Client. And what they're really about is how do I actually get data into the cloud? Okay. So firstly, Unified Network Insertion is about how do I actually leverage my network infrastructure, irrespective of where that is, to actually get the data in. You know, I talked about the distributed model earlier, so I've got 50 branch locations. You know, do I have to go out there and rejig everybody's proxy settings on their Explorer, or download pack files and all these kind of good things? Well, not necessarily. With the ISR G2s, the latest generation of Cisco routers, what you can do now is leverage intelligence within that platform to transparently grab traffic, HTTP and HTTPS traffic, and actually redirect that into the ScanSafe Web Service Cloud. Okay, so wherever you've got that sort of deployment with the latest versions of iOS, you can do that transparently. We grab user information, we grab the HTTP request, and we'll forward that into the cloud. And of course, you're then getting transparent redirection. You're getting all of the benefits that you get from a centrally hosted, on-prem type of web security solution, but delivered really in a highly distributed fashion. On the secure mobility side, some of you may be familiar with the Cisco AnyConnect client. For those of you who aren't, AnyConnect is really our sort of footprint in the SSL IPsec VPN, H2.1x, and also now with web content security. So what we've done is we've integrated a client called the Anywhere Plus client into the AnyConnect client. Lots of Anywheres. But in essence, what we're doing is we're now, through that unified client footprint, you can deliver all of your VPN functionality, if you need it, H2.1x type of functionality, but also the ability from a remote laptop to be able to grab web traffic and redirect that transparently into the cloud as well. Again, unifying that experience for the user. So if they're off net, they go home, they go to a Starbucks, they go to a Costa Coffee, they open the laptop, they log on to their local hotspot. The policy they will receive for their web security will be identical as if they were connected onto their LAN. Because the Anywhere Plus client that's built into the AnyConnect client today will redirect all that traffic, it will grab their user agent strings, it will grab their user information, apply the policy so that those devices remain protected irrespective of where they're physically located. And of course, if we were talking more geographic diversity than the UK, because the ScanSafe capability is delivered in however many countries, 30, 40 different countries across the globe, if they open their laptop in the US, they'll talk to a local US tower, as we call them, ScanSafe scanning tower, so they're not necessarily having to bounce traffic back to the UK and back again in order for it to be scrubbed. It's essentially done at a local node. So really delivering that unified experience really comes from that cloud security capability from ScanSafe. So what sort of underpins it? Well, as you can imagine, the cloud infrastructure that sits behind all of this is clearly highly available. The ScanSafe service has received 100% uptime over the last 7-8 years that it's actually been in existence. So we haven't experienced downtime, something that not many networks could really kind of contest to. But also it is highly distributed. So across those 20, 30 countries that we exist in, we'll always be able to give a local experience to the end users. And all of that data is mined from thousands, if not millions of web hits a day. So we've got that central reporting capability. We can deliver all of that through a highly customizable user portal. And of course, it hooks into something that we call, I'll let this build out, the Cisco Secure Intelligent Operations Center. So SIO really now is Cisco's security intelligence. It's around about 500 or so engineers that work within Cisco looking at threat research, security information. They take information from the sender-based side of things. They take information from our IPS, intrusion prevention system, skill set and knowledge base to deliver a very, very global and very, very broad view of security threats across the internet. And of course, by taking that level of intelligence and allowing users, allowing customers to take that, again, what we're trying to do is increase the level of efficacy, the level of accuracy that comes from that level of global intelligence. So as I talked about, we leverage this infrastructure in a variety of ways. So I've talked a lot about the sort of cloud security side of things and what we can do within the cloud itself. But of course, we can also take this information down to the individual devices as well. So I talked earlier about the email security side of things, the iMport email security appliances, and the fact that we can leverage something called sender base, where we grab all of this information and we apply a reputation score to all email senders across the globe effectively. So as we see volumes of spam increase, as we see volumes of malware increase, what we're able to very quickly do is at a global level have a sort of holistic view of what reputation a particular email sender has. And we can use that in a variety of ways. We can also now use that in our intrusion prevention signatures. So one of the big challenges with intrusion prevention systems historically has always been how do I manage the volume of information that comes out of it? How do I really know whether it's accurate? How do I deal with false positives and all these kind of challenges? By coupling the sort of signature detection mechanisms that we have within our IPS with the global intelligence that's delivered through the Secure Intelligent Operations Center, what we're now able to deliver is a greater level of accuracy on intrusion prevention signatures, because what I can now do is not only say, well, that traffic looks bad based upon the signature, but I can also look at the reputation of the sender. And that gives me all sorts of interesting things like geolocation. So I could say, well, actually, that looks like an SQL injection attack, but it's coming from a pretty trusted country. So maybe it isn't. Maybe it's one of those gray areas. But actually, it's an SQL injection attack, and it's coming from an IP address that's in a known botnet in a less reputable country. So if I tie all of those various elements together, I can be much more accurate over the kind of decisions I'm making within my intrusion prevention system. Okay? And then finally, in the web security appliance. So I talked about the ability for us to deliver web security in either hosted or on-premise solutions. The WSA, the web security appliance, is the equivalent of our email security appliance, but for web. So it's an on-premise type solution. Again, leveraging that global intelligence to be able to make those kind of real-time decisions over reputation of web services and so on and so forth. And we do that in a variety of ways, and there's a number of different things that we sort of look at. I'll let this one build out a little bit. So firstly, when the traffic is going through the capabilities that we have through the ScanSafe Cloud, we have massively deep content analysis. And a lot of this is machine learned as well, because we can leverage that sort of central database. We've got this deep content analysis, so we can look at the structure of a web page. And actually a web page we break down into a number of different elements, and in parallel scan those different elements to look for anomalous or unusual activity, whether that's within the HTML itself, whether it's in PDFs, whether it's in Flash, in Java. We can effectively look across all of those different elements to look for malicious activity. We look at the content, so we can look at things like exe files, and we can make decisions based upon the structure of an exe file. You know, we know from the number of hits that we get or have gotten over the many years that the ScanSafe service has been operating, that there are certain things that we should and shouldn't see. There are certain indicators for malicious or bad behavior. You know, exe files should be structured in a particular way. If they're not, then actually we've got a pretty good idea of what a bad .exe file looks like. And the same is true of PDF and Flash and Java and all these other different things. Because we've got that global level of intelligence, we can now make much more informed decisions over the kind of things we're flowing through, as opposed to it's a URL, it looks bad, and it's coming from this particular domain. Slightly oversimplified, I know, but it's that kind of thing. And then within the scripting side of things, of course, the web really isn't a static entity anymore. There's a huge amount of reliance upon scripting, whether that's JavaScript, whether that's active server pages, and all these kind of different technologies. All of these things could potentially introduce malware into the environment as well. So what we can do is, again, as the name suggests, we can actually emulate what that script will do. So rather than, again, looking at the code of the script and whatever, we can actually run that script as if it were running on an end system and make some determination as to whether that's also going to deliver some malicious capability on the end device. And of course, all of that stuff is delivered real time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year across the ScanSafe environment, constantly adding to the body of knowledge that we have within that domain. Not my slides, by the way, so I can't contest I'm a PowerPoint expert. About 7 billion hits a day is what we get through the ScanSafe environment. Now, of course, with that level of visibility, we're getting such an increased view of what's actually going out there. So we can make those kind of decisions over, PDF files. And these aren't necessarily things that are static. What we're talking about here is trying to capture those things that we don't already know about. The day zero, that sort of holy grail of security. And again, because we're doing it based upon anomalous activity, based upon all of that learned experience, we can begin to detect the patterns over that period of time. So whether it's PDF files, whether that's coming through a JavaScript, whether it's coming through an active server page, whether it's coming through an iframe vulnerability, or whatever it may be, all of those things can be used to build up that overall picture of what's actually going on in that environment. And of course, because we're pulling all of that back into a central data center, we've also got this fantastic reporting engine on the front end. And again, because you're taking advantage of our infrastructure, we can store pretty much anything we want. It's not unlimitless, of course, but we've got an awful lot more capability in the reporting engine than maybe your local on-premise box is ever going to have, because it's only got a finite amount of disk space and so on to be able to churn through that information. By leveraging the cloud view, we can cut and dice the reports in so many different ways, using over 100 different attributes to be able to deliver the kind of intelligence that you need to make those kind of informed choices over what sort of policy adjustments you might need to make. So it's a pretty broad set of capabilities we have in that respect. I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and look at the securing of the cloud access, because this is quite an interesting one that I came across a number of years back when we were talking about this area, because somebody asked the question to an audience of Cisco people and said, how many cloud apps do you think we use within Cisco? And various people made some guesses, 10, 15 maybe. We use Salesforce.com an awful lot within Cisco. But the numbers were of that sort of order of magnitude. And actually what they found, there was over 87 different cloud applications that we were using internally. Now, I'm sure in your organizations you might find you'd be able to point to one or two of those, but I bet there's an awful lot that you probably don't even know people are using. Whether that's things like Dropbox, Google Mail, SurveyMonkey, all these different things are essentially cloud apps. So being able to secure some sort of access to them also becomes quite important. And so what we've done is we've added capabilities within the web security appliance, and we have the capabilities within the ScanSafe environment to be able to deliver kind of unified single sign-on. Because the usage of all of these different applications, again, you need to deliver a unified seamless experience to the end user. So if I'm a user, I come in, I hit my web security appliance, but I want to go and consume services from a cloud app, I don't want to have to go and log on with a different ID. Being able to use the WSA with a SAML assertion to be able to provide a single sign-on to a back-end service is also quite interesting. And we've got that already tied in with things like Cisco WebEx, with Salesforce.com, which of course for public sector is probably not that interesting. But of course, anything that can take a SAML assertion or a SAML token is going to be able to consume this single sign-on kind of mechanism. But of course, the flip side of this is that when you're looking at user management and you're looking at potentially terminating employees or changing their rights, all you have to do is change their local one. You don't have to go to your third-party provider to go and modify rights on that web-based or cloud application that's being consumed. Okay. And this is going to become really important, I think, over the next sort of 5-10 years as more and more cloud apps begin to get rolled out into the public sector, and certainly as then more and more of these shared services applications get consumed across organizations, because I think there will be an environment, the government talks about the App Store, where departments will be able to consume services that other departments are standing up, or consuming services that, that industry is providing. And I think these kind of single sign-on, very seamless environments are going to become really, really important. And then finally, the area I just want to touch upon is very briefly just on the cloud infrastructure. So the cloud infrastructure itself, I think, introduces a few interesting areas. And I think the next presenter is going to be talking a little bit about sort of multi-tenancy and some of the challenges from that perspective. But I just want to touch upon one particular aspect, because a lot of the technologies that we use within the cloud space, I don't think are necessarily new technologies. We're just using them in slightly different ways. The one area where there is quite a big difference is when we start getting into classic virtualization. And that is that my visibility that I used to experience on the physical level, so being able to physically cable a server into a switch and traffic effectively always comes out of that cable, I virtualize everything. I've now got a virtual cable sat between VMs and I lose my visibility. And of course, that's potentially bad. I might want to virtualize all of those things onto a single server, but I still might want to deliver an element of control. So we introduced a little while ago something called the Virtual Security Gateway, the VSG. And what the VSG is really designed to try and do is if you like, take that level of visibility and control from the physical domain, physical firewalls and such like, and actually pull it into the virtual domain. So actually pulling that right into the virtual machine itself so that I can now build policy irrespective of my virtual machine makeup, the way they're cut and carved across the physical domain. So the kind of view that I'm getting is simply being able to say, actually, those two VMs there, those two green ones, sit in one logical domain. I actually don't care where they physically exist. I just know they're in a domain. And I know I want to provide controls to and from that domain. And I can utilize the VSG, which sits on top of the Nexus 1000V, which I'm sure you've probably heard talk about today, and utilize the intelligence within that Nexus 1000V to deliver that level of granular control. So that's classic 5-tuple stateful firewalling, but also more interesting things that get into the virtualization space as well. So I can start to make decisions based upon host OS, not host OS, on guest OS. I can look at some virtual machine attributes that are delivered by vCenter, so there's some of the elements from the VMware space I can pull into that decision as well. But of course, what I ultimately get as well with the Nexus 1000V, and again, I'm sure this has been talked about as well today, is that I get that flexibility of being able to move that policy around when I do things like vMotion. So I physically pick, or logically pick that machine up and move it to another data center, another location. My VSG will pull that policy with it. It will remain within the green domain, and so any of those policies in terms of the kind of traffic that can go to and from it will remain in existence, because we're leveraging that technology of the Nexus 1000V and the VSG to provide that inherently within the virtual machine space. So I sort of come really kind of full circle back to the three different domains. I've focused quite heavily on the content security side of things these days for this presentation. Of course, there's an awful lot and probably many hours worth of content you can talk about on the infrastructure side. But I think what we're trying to deliver here is really a comprehensive set of capabilities ranging from the cloud security services through to secure cloud access, as well as the cloud security infrastructure. And with that, I'll take any questions, if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
No problem.
Okay.